all in. Tensions running high in St. Louis as protesters gather from around the country. Then,
it's going to look worse than it is. I think the man that has said this is an idiot.
a plane passenger jokes about having Ebola. Plus, Republicans have a new campaign strategy: terrify you. Then, standing up against climate change, the Massachusetts DA who dropped charges against two men who blocked a coal shipment.
This is one of the gravest crises the planet has ever faced. We took a stand here today.
He joins me tonight. And getting pulled from class for a Nobel Prize, Malala becomes the youngest winner of the Peace Award. All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. For a third night in a row, people are expected to be out on the streets in the St. Louis metro area, protesting the fatal shooting of a young black man. Earlier today, hundreds marched in Clayton, Missouri, demanding the removal of St. Louis County Prosecutor Bob McCullough, and some demanding the arrest of police officer Darren Wilson, following the death of 18-year-old Michael Brown. There was a tense standoff last night between police and protesters following the shooting death of 18-year-old Vondert Myers by a uniformed, off-duty St. Louis police officer on Wednesday. Police say Myers had a gun that he fired at the officer after an altercation, a charge his family disputes. And earlier today, his family identified Myers on a store surveillance tape just before his fatal encounter with the officer. They reiterated they do not believe that he was armed.
You could plainly see that he was not armed. His pants was almost hanging off his whole body.
The same people who supposed to protect and serve, they're taking their lives with no explanation. Then they try to justify it. And then they put them out there as animals, like they were animals, and they was these hardcore criminals. And it hurts so bad because you can say all these horrible things about my son, but I don't know anything about the man who took his life.
Autopsy results released late last night revealed Myers was shot once in the cheek and 6 or 7 times in the body, not in the back of the head, as some had suggested. That information was released in the midst of last night's marches, which occurred not in Ferguson, but in the heart of St. Louis. Now we are poised to see things heat up even more in St. Louis as thousands are expected to flood into the area, are arriving as I speak for planned actions over the weekend. Early yesterday evening, St. Louis PD appeared to try to avoid the mistakes of the Ferguson police, staying back even as protests intensified. Protesters blocked several intersections and chanted things like "No justice, no peace," and "United we stand, united we fall." At one point, a few protesters took an American flag and burned it as cameras rolled. Around 10 p.m., police seemed to shift their tactics. We started to see many of the same trappings of the intense police presence that were part of the cycle of escalation that led to almost 2 weeks of unrest in Ferguson over the summer. Police stood in a line with shields, something we saw in Ferguson in August. They were dressed in full SWAT gear, attempting to contain the protesters. Protests continued on for several hours into the night, with pepper spray being used on several protesters.
Water, we can get some of that with us.
Are you going in or not?
Hold on.
Come on, in or not? Here, you got
I need the water, okay?
Hey,
water!
Taft's gonna meet you there, Tor. Taft's gonna meet you there, Tor.
Taft gonna meet you there, man. He's gonna meet you there now, dog. We're gonna bring this with us. All right.
I need some water.
Okay,
I need that water.
The night ended with 8 arrests, 2 police vehicles damaged, and 1 business with broken windows. Today, the family of Michael Brown released a statement urging calm. And so far, as of now, we have seen calm, peaceful protests tonight. But it is early on a Friday night as thousands of people are headed into the St. Louis metro area for a series of protests that are being billed as some of the largest in recent St. Louis history. Joining me now is Tremaine Lee, MSNBC reporter. He's been covering events in Ferguson since Michael Brown's death. He's been there all day. Tremaine, what did you see today?
Earlier, through a cold, whipping rain, which started out as a crowd of dozens, turned into a crowd of at least 200. They stood outside of the Buzz Westfall Justice Center, proclaiming themselves there to ask Prosecutor Bob McCullough, or demanding the prosecutor to step down. They marched around the block again, emboldened by some of the events that took place just about a dozen miles from here in St. Louis, the killing of the 18-year-old man. And they're emboldened, they're excited, pressing through the wind and rain, and they're here to make a statement.
You know, we have seen in the last few days, because of the shooting of Vondert Myers, who it should be said, according to police, according to what we know so far, looks to be under quite different circumstances than the fatal shooting of Mike Brown. Police say there was a weapon recovered that he fired at the officer. That has been not independently confirmed as of yet, but I should put that out there. It does seem like the protests have sort of ignited across the region now. I mean, last night you saw protests that looked like the Ferguson protests in the very heart of St. Louis, in neighborhoods in St. Louis that were far removed from the unrest in August. I think we may have lost sound on Tremaine there. Tremaine, you still with me, my man?
I'm back, Chris. Certainly, what began as protests here in Ground Zero in Ferguson clearly spread beyond these borders into St. Louis. And even despite some of the facts that police say they presented, that they found a gun, that there was a bullet hole in a car in the direction of the officer, people here are still angry and upset that another young black man has been killed. Again, and part of this speaks to the abyss of distrust between the community and the police. And the anger, especially among a kind of core group of protesters. Veterans of the protests here in Ferguson say they're not going to stop until their voices are heard, not just here, not just in St. Louis, but across this country. That's going national now.
You were there in August. You and I were both there. We were both covering it. It struck me then how organic the protests were, but often how unorganized or disorganized they seem. Is there a difference now? Does it seem like the protests are more organized, that there's sort of leadership, that there's folks who have had experience doing this?
It's kind of twofold. In those early days where things seemed so unwieldy and organic and spontaneous all across Ferguson, here on West Florissant and over on Canfield where Michael Brown was killed. And then people started to organize and have specific goals and ideals and demands, and even organizing under Hands Up United and other organizations to pull off what they're calling this Weekend of Resistance. But then even now, I'm not sure if it's as organized as we thought. There's expecting thousands. We haven't seen many people out here yet. There's talk of splinter groups going over to the Shaw neighborhood in St. Louis while there are events planned here in Ferguson. And even as I spoke, I just got a text message just saying that there's another action over at the police department. At the same time, there's supposed to be a candlelight vigil here. And so as they congeal with their ideals and organized, it's still a little unwieldy because so many people have so many different interests under this kind of umbrella of protests.
Tremaine Lee, thank you very much. Joining me now are the co-founders of Hands Up United, Robert Tefpo and Tori Russell. They are also both the Organization for Black Struggle. Tori, let me start with you. That was footage we showed of you being pepper sprayed last night. Can you tell me about the circumstances under which that happened late last night in St. Louis?
No matter the location, Ferguson and St. Louis, a peaceful protest turns violent and ugly by the arms of the police. We were peacefully protesting, walking down the streets on Grand, walking past Arsenal. I believe there was a tactic by the police. They walked out police officers. Some people wanted to have a verbal confrontation with them to verbalize, their anger. And after that, the cars were already back there. They formed formations. Then behind us, they came out of cars and they swarmed us, no warning. Pepper sprayed me probably within a yard. They started beating up people. And it was strategic to get people off of Grand onto Arsenal, where the buildings and the trees are tall, so they can do what they do, which is hurt peaceful protesters.
Well, let me say this, Tef, and I'll direct this question to you because I was watching the live stream last night and I saw you on it. For folks that are watching that live stream who are seeing what's happening, the protesters are in the police officers' faces. They're yelling at them, sometimes not more than a few inches away. What do you say to people who say you are provoking, you are going out of your way to try to elicit this response from the police?
Well, 17 shots into an unarmed man was provoking. Leaving Mike Brown in the street for 4.5 hours, dead, not allowing his parents to approach his body, forcing his parents to watch their son die was provoking. I think it's an unfair narrative that says, you can come to our communities that you don't even live in, shoot us dead, and then expect us to kumbaya our way out of the situation, to expect us to not hurt, to expect us to not express the anger. This problem has been going on since my father was my age, since my mother was my age. It doesn't look like your father's civil rights movement because it's not. We're fed up. No one has answers. You know, people try to pacify us. The information that they do give us in the mainstream media is information that we already know in the community. We haven't got answers at all, and we're hurt.
Let me ask you about one thing you said at the beginning. You said fire 17 shots in an unarmed man, and I assume that's talking about Vondert Myers, who was shot and killed in the Shaw neighborhood. You know, police say they have recovered a weapon. They say there's ballistics, there's shell casings. Do you think that's fabricated?
St. Louis PD is widely known for a term that we call in my neighborhood free casing. I've been walking down the street one morning, going to work, and the cop pulled up on me and said, "What do you know about this murder?" I say nothing. He says, "Get in the back of this car and tell me about it downtown." This happens all the time. So I don't think that it's an unfair situation for us to be suspicious of the fact that they say he had a gun and his parents didn't.
Tori, these protests that are planned for the weekend, do you see them taking place throughout? Do you think people will be back in St. Louis, in Ferguson, in Clayton, all around the metro area this weekend?
To speak on what Tremaine said, it's a method to the madness. It's the organizing or the disorganization that you see is actually a plan. You can't come down with 22 or 27 municipalities at the same time, lock people up, hold hostages, pepper spray, tear gas people when you're spread thin. I commend them for coming out last night. Good luck doing it all weekend in the weekend of resistance.
Tef Poe and Tori Russell, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joining me now, Tim Reed. He's a correspondent for Reuters. Tim, you wrote a piece about planning that was happening inside officialdom in the St. Louis metro area and in Missouri for the possibility of larger scale unrest in the event of a lack of indictment for Darren Wilson. What did you find out through your reporting?
Well, I found out, I mean, obviously all sides, police enforcement, African-American community and the white community, everyone is very fixated on the grand jury decision, which is expected to come out probably around the second week of November. And in the event that Officer Darren Wilson is not indicted by the grand jury, which many expect to be the decision, there is a great deal of concern among law enforcement that this will spark big protests, maybe even bigger than the ones we saw in August in the aftermath of Michael Brown's shooting. So they are actually meeting 2 or 3 times a week, various police forces in the area, to draw up contingency plans to prepare for these riots. They also worry that the riots will not just be confined to Ferguson, but to St. Louis, and also they're also talking to other police forces in other parts of the country, both to get advice on how to deal with mass civil unrest, but also to keep tabs with other police forces on outside groups that might come into the area to, as the police enforcement people say, possibly to cause trouble in the event that Officer Wilson is not indicted.
You're saying they're meeting 2 or 3 times a week. I mean, that's a fair amount of preparation going into this.
Yeah, I mean, I think this shows the level of concern about this imminent grand jury decision. I mean, among the African-American community, and this is not lost on everyone else, the grand jury that is deciding the Michael Brown shooting and whether or not to indict Officer Wilson is a 12-member grand jury. 9 of those members are white, 6 are white men, 3 members of the grand jury are African-American, and the chief prosecutor in charge of the proceedings, Bob McCullough, who you mentioned earlier in the report, he comes from a family of policemen. His own father was shot in the line of duty by an African-American man. So there's a lot of distrust, profound distrust in Ferguson that they will get a fair and impartial decision, although that is something that Bob McCullough fiercely denies and says that the process is fair.
Of course, the question is whether police learn what lessons they take away in responding to mass protests, which have been largely peaceful. I mean, throughout, if you sort of quantify them, the vast majority of protests and expression, even when they've been angry, have been peaceful. What kind of posture they take? Any sense in reporting of what that looks like?
No, well, that's very much a work in progress, and that is, I think, one of the major things that they're discussing in these meetings is what kind of posture to take. Which police force takes the lead. I mean, it was announced last week that the St. Louis County Police are now going to take the lead day to day from now on. Whether they take the lead after the decision on the indictment is made is still being decided. I mean, they're not ruling out or taking off the table, you know, if things get really bad, the use of armored carriers that we saw in the aftermath of the Michael Brown shooting. They're not taking anything off the table, but they're obviously very concerned, and this is a major part of the debate, how to patrol the streets in the case of problems.
Tim Reed of Reuters, thank you very much.
Thank you.
After years of fracturing, Republicans have finally been able to come together on one thing to scare the hell out of the American public. I'll explain ahead.